Listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about revenge, betrayal, and the dark secrets that connect us all. There are layers to this story that run deeper than you can imagine. And I promise you, if you stay until the very end, you'll discover a truth so chilling, so perfectly orchestrated, that it will leave you questioning everyone around you. Trust me when I say this. Nothing is as it seems, and the web of deception I'm about to unravel connects more lives than you could ever imagine. My name is Emily Morrison. I'm 42 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was the perfect life. As one of the most successful corporate lawyers in Chicago, I built my career on reading people, finding their weaknesses, and exposing their lies in courtrooms across the city. My husband, Richard Morrison, was the golden boy of Chicago's business elite, CEO of Morrison & Associates, the kind of man who commanded respect at every charity gala and business conference. Together, we were the power couple everyone envied. We had the penthouse apartment, the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, and a marriage that looked picture perfect from the outside. But here's what I've learned about perfect lives. They're usually built on perfect lies. And the bigger the lie, the more devastating the fall when the truth finally comes crashing down. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember it so clearly because it was the day I was supposed to be celebrating the biggest win of my career, a landmark case that had made national headlines. I just secured a $50 million settlement for a client, and the legal community was buzzing about it. Richard had promised to take me to dinner at Le Bernardin to celebrate, but he'd canceled at the last minute, citing an emergency board meeting. That should have been my first real clue. Richard never canceled on me. In 15 years of marriage, he'd moved heaven and earth to keep his promises to me. But I was too caught up in my own success to notice the pattern that was forming. The second clue came 3 days later. I was working late at the office, reviewing contracts for a new client, when I decided to surprise Richard with his favorite Thai takeout. I knew he'd been stressed about the quarterly reports, working long hours, barely sleeping. I thought a surprise dinner might help him relax. Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. I had my own key card. After all, I was Mrs. Morrison, the CEO's wife. The building was nearly empty at 9 p.m., just a few security guards and the cleaning crew. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried me to the 47th floor, where Richard's corner office overlooked the city. I'll never forget the sound of her laugh echoing down the hallway. It was light, musical, intimate. The kind of laugh that belongs in a bedroom, not a boardroom. My steps slowed as I approached Richard's office, the Thai food suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see Richard's desk, the same mahogany desk where we'd signed our marriage certificate 15 years ago. But now, that desk held a different kind of history. She was perched on the edge of it, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her skirt hiked up just enough to be scandalous. Amanda Chen, his 26-year-old secretary, the one he'd hired 6 months ago because she was extremely qualified and perfect for the position. Perfect for the position, indeed. Richard was standing between her legs, his hands on her thighs, his mouth pressed against her neck. They were completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. I watched as his hands moved up her body as she arched her back and whispered something that made him groan with pleasure. I should have stormed in. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the Thai food at both of them and demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed, watching my husband of 15 years make love to another woman in the office where I'd visited him countless times, where I'd brought him soup when he was sick, where I'd celebrated his promotions and comforted him through his failures. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I felt like I was drowning in my own disbelief. This was Richard, my Richard, the man who still brought me coffee in bed every morning, who remembered our anniversary every year, who told me he loved me just that morning before leaving for work. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the food. I made it to the elevator without being seen, but I don't remember the ride down or the walk to my car. I sat in the parking garage for over an hour, staring at the concrete wall, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. When I finally drove home, Richard was already there, sitting in our living room with a glass of wine, looking relaxed and content. He smiled when he saw me, that same warm smile that had made me fall in love with him in law school. "Hey, beautiful," he said, standing to kiss me. "How was your day?" I searched his face for any sign of guilt, any hint that he'd just been with another woman. But there was nothing. He was the same Richard I'd married, the same man I'd trusted with my heart, my future, my entire life. "It was fine," I managed to say. "How was your board meeting?" "Oh, you know how it is," he said, settling back into his chair. "Boring financial reports and budget discussions. I'm just glad it's over." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, so naturally, that I almost believed it myself. This was the moment I realized that the Richard I thought I knew might not exist at all. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I started paying attention to the little things. The way he checked his phone constantly, the sudden need for late meetings and weekend conferences, the new cologne he'd started wearing. I noticed how he'd become distant in bed, how he'd stopped really looking at me when we talked, how he'd started showering as soon as he got home from work. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch with my friend Sarah, a journalist who specialized in covering Chicago's business community. We were discussing my recent case victory when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "You know," she said, cutting into her salad, "I've been hearing some interesting rumors about Richard's company. Nothing concrete, but there's talk around the business community about some personal complications affecting his professional reputation." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, my heart was racing. What kind of complications? Sarah leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Well, apparently there's been some gossip about him and his secretary. People are saying they've been seen together at restaurants, hotels, that sort of thing. It's become something of an open secret among his colleagues." The humiliation was instant and overwhelming. Not only was Richard cheating on me, but he was doing it so openly that it had become gossip fodder for the entire business community. While I'd been working late nights to build my career, he'd been parading his affair around Chicago like some kind of trophy. "I probably shouldn't have mentioned it," Sarah continued, studying my face. "I'm sure it's just malicious gossip. You know how people love to tear down successful couples." I forced a smile. Of course, people always need something to talk about. But inside, I was burning. The betrayal was bad enough, but the public humiliation was unbearable. I'd built my reputation on being sharp, observant, impossible to fool. Yet here I was, the last person in Chicago to know about my own husband's affair. That night, I confronted Richard directly. I'd planned to be subtle, to gather more evidence before revealing what I knew. But when he walked through the door at 11 p.m., reeking of Amanda's perfume and lying about another emergency meeting, I snapped. "I know about Amanda," I said quietly. The effect was immediate. His face went pale, his confident demeanor crumbled, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in his eyes. Real, genuine fear. "Emily, Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't you dare lie to me anymore. I saw you with her. I know what you've been doing, and apparently so does half of Chicago." He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." My voice was steady, controlled, but inside I was screaming. "You've been having an affair with your secretary, and you've been stupid enough to let it become public knowledge. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To us?" "Emily, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been making a fool of me for months. How you've been risking everything we've built together for a 26-year-old girl who's young enough to be your daughter?" He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't remorse or guilt. It was calculation. He was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to minimize the damage, how to manipulate me into forgiving him. "It was a mistake," he said finally. "A moment of weakness. It meant nothing, Emily. You're my wife. You're the one I love. If I'm the one you love, then why does everyone in Chicago know about your affair except me?" He had no answer for that. We stared at each other across our living room, 15 years of marriage hanging in the balance. I could see him trying to find the right words, the perfect combination of apology and explanation that would make this all go away. But I was done with his words. I was done with his lies. And I was done being the naive wife who believed everything her husband told her. "I want you to end it," I said quietly. "I want you to fire her. I want you to end this affair. And I want you to prove to me that our marriage still means something to you." "Of course," he said quickly. "Yes, absolutely. I'll end it tomorrow. I'll fire her. I'll make this right, Emily. I promise." Another lie. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He had no intention of ending anything. He was just buying time, trying to figure out how to be more careful, more discreet. That was the moment I realized that my marriage was over. Not because of the affair. Affairs can be forgiven, worked through, overcome, but because Richard felt no genuine remorse for what he'd done. He was only sorry he'd been caught. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Richard slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to be the discarded wife, the woman who'd been replaced by a younger model. I was going to be the author of my own ending. And I was going to make sure that ending was spectacular. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While Richard showered, humming contentedly as if nothing had happened, I made my first call. Not to a divorce attorney, not to a therapist, but to my friend Marcus, who ran the most successful public relations firm in Chicago. "Emily!" Marcus's voice was bright and cheerful. "Congratulations on that settlement. You're absolutely dominating the legal world right now." "Thank you, Marcus. I need to meet with you today. It's urgent." "Of course. What's this about?" I glanced toward the bathroom where I could still hear Richard's off-key singing. Let's just say I need to plan a very special public event, and I need someone who understands how to manage media attention. Marcus was intrigued. "I'm free for lunch. Shall we say 1 p.m. at the Union Club?" "Perfect. And Marcus, this conversation stays between us." "Understood." The next call was to my assistant, Jennifer. "I need you to clear my calendar for the next few days. Tell everyone I'm preparing for a major case and can't be disturbed." "Of course, Ms. Morrison. Anything specific I should know about?" "Just that I'll be working on the most important case of my career." And in a way, I was. The case of Emily Morrison versus the lies that had defined her marriage. My lunch with Marcus was enlightening. The Union Club was the perfect place for a discreet conversation. Exclusive, private, and filled with the kind of people who understood the importance of controlling public narrative. "So," Marcus said, cutting into his salmon, "what kind of event are we talking about?" "A press conference," I said simply. "I want to announce a new charity initiative, something high profile, something that will attract significant media attention." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're branching out into charity work?" Richard and I have been discussing it for months. The lie came easily. We want to start a foundation focused on supporting women in business, particularly those who faced workplace discrimination or harassment. "That's actually brilliant," Marcus said, leaning forward. "With your legal background and Richard's business connections, you could create something really impactful. And the timing is perfect. There's been so much focus on women's issues in the workplace lately." "Exactly. I want to make a real splash with this. Primetime coverage, major newspapers, social media buzz. Can you make that happen? Emily, with your recent case victory and Richard's business prominence, I can get you coverage from every major outlet in the city. When are you thinking?" I smiled, feeling the first rush of excitement I'd experienced in weeks. 2 weeks from today. I want to hold it at the Fairmont Hotel, in their grand ballroom. Something elegant, professional, memorable. "Consider it done. I'll start making calls this afternoon." As Marcus began outlining his media strategy, I found myself thinking about the beautiful irony of what I was planning. Richard's affair had become an open secret in Chicago's business community, but it had remained whispered gossip, nothing more. I was about to turn those whispers into headline news. But first, I needed evidence. Real, undeniable, courtroom-quality evidence that would make it impossible for Richard to deny what he'd done. That afternoon, I made another call. This one to a private investigator I'd worked with on several cases. David Kim was discreet, thorough, and completely professional. He'd helped me gather evidence for numerous corporate cases, and I trusted him implicitly. I need a full investigation, I told him during our meeting at a small cafe downtown. Photos, videos, financial records, communication logs, everything. How long do I have? 2 weeks. Can you do it? David smiled. Emily, I've been doing this for 20 years, Pat. Trust me when I say that cheating spouses are the easiest cases I handle. They're always sloppy, always overconfident, and they never think they'll get caught. Good. I need this to be airtight. No room for doubt, no possibility of denial. You'll have everything you need. The next 10 days were the most surreal of my life. I went through the motions of my normal routine, working on cases, having dinner with Richard, attending social events, while simultaneously planning what would essentially be the public destruction of my marriage. Richard, meanwhile, seemed to believe that our confrontation had solved everything. He was attentive, affectionate, bringing me flowers and taking me to expensive restaurants. He'd even made a show of firing Amanda, though David's investigation quickly revealed that she'd simply been moved to a different department and given a substantial raise. She's now working as a special projects coordinator, David reported during one of our clandestine meetings. Whatever that means, her salary increased by 40%, and she's been given a corner office on the 46th floor. Right below Richard's office, I noted. Exactly. And they're being more careful now, but they're still seeing each other. Hotel meetings twice a week, always the same place, the Ritz-Carlton downtown. They've got a suite reserved under the name Mr. Heather and Mrs. Anderson. The attention to detail was almost insulting. They'd created an entire fake identity for their affair, complete with backstory and fake wedding rings. David had photographed them entering and leaving the hotel, captured them having intimate dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants, and even recorded several phone conversations that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. There's something else, David said, sliding a folder across the table. I did some digging into the company's financial records. It looks like Richard's been using corporate funds to pay for their hotel suite, their dinners, even jewelry for Amanda. We're talking about embezzlement here, Emily. I opened the folder and stared at the financial documents. Richard hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd betrayed his own company, his investors, his employees. He'd been stealing from the business he'd built to fund his affair. How much? I asked. About $75,000 over the past 6 months. It's been carefully hidden, spread across different accounts and expense categories, but it's all there. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. This wasn't just about a cheating husband anymore. This was about a man who'd lost all sense of ethics, who'd betrayed everyone who trusted him. Can you present this evidence in a way that would be admissible in court? Absolutely. I've got everything properly documented and authenticated. Perfect. I'll need copies of everything by Friday. Meanwhile, Marcus was working his magic on the media front. The charity press conference was generating significant buzz. Chicago's business community was intrigued by the idea of the Morrison power couple launching a major charitable initiative. Several major news outlets had confirmed they'd be covering the event, including 2 national networks. We're going to have a packed house, Marcus told me during our final planning meeting. Channel 7, Channel 5, Chicago Tribune, Sun-Times, plus several business publications, and at least 3 national outlets. This is going to be huge, Emily. And you're certain about the live coverage? Channel 7 and Channel 5 are both planning to broadcast portions of it live during their evening news programs. Plus, we'll be live streaming the entire event on social media. Your message is going to reach hundreds of thousands of people. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. Marcus had no idea that the message I was planning to deliver was nothing like what he expected. The night before the press conference, I barely slept. Richard was beside me, snoring softly, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. I studied his face in the darkness, trying to remember when I'd stopped loving him and started planning his destruction. The truth was, I wasn't sure I had stopped loving him. That was what made this so painful. I was about to destroy the man I'd planned to spend my life with, the man who'd been my partner, my best friend, my everything for 15 years. But he'd made his choice. He'd chosen Amanda over me, lies over truth, selfishness over loyalty, and now I was making mine. I got up quietly and went to my study, where I'd been preparing my speech for the press conference. It was written on simple white paper, 3 pages long, every word carefully chosen for maximum impact. I'd rehearsed it dozens of times, but I read through it one more time, making sure every detail was perfect. Tomorrow, I would stand in front of Chicago's media elite and expose my husband's affair to the world. I would show them the evidence of his embezzlement, his lies, his complete betrayal of everything he claimed to stand for. I would destroy his reputation, his business, his future, and then I would walk away, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard had made me a laughingstock in Chicago's business community, the naive wife who was the last to know about her husband's affair. But after tomorrow, I would be the woman who'd had the courage to expose the truth, who'd refused to be a victim, who'd taken control of her own story. After tomorrow, Richard would be the one they'd be talking about, and the conversation wouldn't be kind. The morning of the press conference dawned clear and cold, with that sharp October wind that cuts through Chicago like a knife. I woke up before my alarm, my body humming with nervous energy. Richard was already up, standing at our bedroom window in his silk pajamas, sipping coffee and looking out at the city skyline. "Big day," he said without turning around. "Are you nervous about the press conference?" "Not nervous," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Just ready." He turned to smile at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. The idealistic law student who'd talked for hours about justice and truth, who'd promised to always be honest with me, who'd sworn that we'd face everything together. "I'm proud of you," he said, crossing the room to kiss my forehead. "This charity is going to change lives, Emily. You're going to make a real difference." I nodded, unable to speak. In a few hours, I would indeed change lives, starting with his. "I should get ready," I said, heading toward the bathroom. "I want to look perfect today." "You always look perfect." Another lie. Even his compliments had become lies. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my outfit with the same care I'd use for a closing argument. A navy blue Armani suit, professional, authoritative, but not cold. Pearl earrings and necklace. Classic, respectable, the kind of jewelry that suggested integrity and tradition. My hair in a low chignon, sophisticated but not severe. I wanted to look like the wronged wife, the woman who deserved better, the victim who'd found her strength. I wanted the audience to see me and immediately understand that I was someone worth believing, someone worth supporting. Richard left for the office at his usual time, kissing me goodbye and telling me he'd see me at the hotel. He had no idea that David Kim had been following him since 6 a.m., documenting his every move, ready to provide real-time updates if needed. At 10 a.m., I met Marcus at the Fairmont Hotel to do a final walkthrough of the event space. The grand ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and enough space for the 100-plus media representatives who'd confirmed their attendance. "The podium is set up here," Marcus explained, walking me through the layout. "We'll have cameras positioned throughout the room, and the live stream will be managed from that corner booth. The lighting is perfect, the sound system is tested and ready." "And Richard's chair?" "Right here, next to the podium. He'll be in full view of every camera when you introduce him." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. Marcus had no idea that Richard would be in full view of every camera when I destroyed him. "The reporters will be seated in the first 10 rows, Marcus continued. "I've prepared press packets with information about the charity, your backgrounds, and some talking points for follow-up questions." "Perfect. What time do we start?" 2 p.m. sharp. The live broadcasts are scheduled for 2:15, so we'll have a brief introduction and then jump right into your presentation. By 1:30, the ballroom was packed. I watched from a side room as reporters, cameramen, and photographers filled the space. I recognized faces from every major news outlet in Chicago, plus several national correspondents who'd flown in for the event. The energy in the room was electric. This was clearly being seen as a major story, the launch of what could be a significant charitable foundation by one of Chicago's most prominent couples. Richard arrived at 1:45, looking confident and relaxed. He was wearing his lucky tie, the one he'd worn to every major business presentation for the past 10 years. He found me in the side room and kissed me on the cheek. "Ready to change the world?" he asked with a grin. "More than ready," I replied. At exactly 2 p.m., Marcus introduced us to the assembled crowd. The applause was warm and genuine as we walked onto the stage together. Richard took his seat beside the podium, beaming with pride and anticipation. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. Cameras were rolling, lights were blazing, and hundreds of thousands of people across Chicago were about to hear what I had to say. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here today. I'm Emily Morrison, and I'm here to talk to you about truth, justice, and the importance of holding people accountable for their actions." I saw a few confused glances between reporters. This wasn't the opening they'd expected for a charity announcement. 6 months ago, I thought I was living a perfect life. I had a successful career, a beautiful home, and what I believed was a loving marriage. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room. I was wrong. The room was completely silent now. I could feel the tension building, the collective realization that this was not going to be the event they'd expected. Ladies and gentlemen, I called this press conference today not to announce a charity, but to expose a truth that has been hidden for far too long. A truth about betrayal, about lies, and about the man sitting beside me. I turned to look at Richard. His face had gone pale, his confident smile replaced by a look of dawning horror. My husband, Richard Morrison, has been having an affair with his secretary, Amanda Chen, for over 6 months. This affair has been an open secret in Chicago's business community, but he has denied it vehemently to me, to his employees, and to anyone who dared to ask. The room erupted. Cameras swung toward Richard, who was frozen in his chair like a deer in headlights. Reporters were furiously taking notes. Photographers were snapping pictures, and the live stream was capturing every moment. But adultery is not the only betrayal I'm here to expose today, I continued, my voice rising above the noise. Richard has been using corporate funds to pay for his affair. Hotel suites, expensive dinners, jewelry for his mistress, all paid for with money stolen from his own company. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder of documents. I have here financial records, photographs, and documented evidence of both the affair and the embezzlement. This evidence has been authenticated by professional investigators and is ready for presentation to the appropriate legal authorities. Richard finally found his voice. "Emily, what are you doing? This is justice," I said, cutting him off. "This is what happens when a man betrays everyone who trusts him and thinks he'll never face consequences." I turned back to the audience, where every reporter in the room was now focused entirely on my words. I am here today to demand something simple, a public apology. Richard Morrison has spent months lying to me, lying to his employees, lying to his business partners, and lying to this community. He has betrayed his wedding vows, his professional ethics, and his basic human decency. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the cameras. I will accept his apology here, today, in front of all of you. He can admit his affair, admit his embezzlement, and apologize for the pain he has caused. If he does this, I will proceed with the charitable foundation we had planned, dedicating it to supporting women who have been betrayed by the men they trusted. I looked directly at Richard, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. If he refuses to apologize, if he continues to lie and deny what everyone in this room now knows to be true, then I will take these documents to the police, to the district attorney, and to the Illinois State Bar Association. I will pursue every legal remedy available to me, both civil and criminal. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Richard's mouth was opening and closing, but no words were coming out. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to escape this nightmare, how to minimize the damage, how to salvage something from the wreckage of his reputation. "Richard," I said softly, but the microphone carried my voice to every corner of the room. "The choice is yours. Apologize now, publicly, honestly, or face the full consequences of your actions." He stood up slowly, his legs shaking. The entire room was watching him, waiting for his response. Every camera was focused on his face, broadcasting his humiliation to hundreds of thousands of people. He began, then stopped. He looked at me, then at the reporters, then back at me. Emily, can we discuss this privately? No, I said firmly. This is where it ends, Richard. In the light with the truth, in front of everyone. You made your choices in private, and they let us hear. Now you make your final choice in public. Another long pause. I could see the exact moment when Richard realized he had no escape, no way out, no option but to face what he'd done. He said again, his voice barely audible. I apologize. I can't hear you, I said, though I'd heard him perfectly, and neither can anyone else. He stepped closer to the microphone, his face red with embarrassment and rage. I apologize, he said louder. I had an affair with Amanda Chen. I used company money to pay for it. I lied to my wife, my employees, and my business partners. The cameras were capturing every word, every expression, every moment of his public humiliation. I'm sorry, he continued, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything. The room erupted again. Reporters were shouting questions, cameras were flashing, and the live stream was capturing the complete destruction of Richard Morrison's reputation and career. I stepped back to the microphone. Thank you, Richard. I accept your apology. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, waiting for the room to quiet down. I have one more announcement to make. Based on the evidence I've gathered, I will be filing for divorce from Richard Morrison. I will also be reporting his embezzlement to the appropriate authorities. Richard's face went white. He'd thought that apologizing would be enough, that he could somehow survive this and rebuild his life. He was wrong. Furthermore, I continued, I will be establishing the Emily Morrison Foundation for Women's Justice, dedicated to supporting women who have been betrayed by their partners and helping them rebuild their lives. This foundation will be funded entirely by my own resources and will operate independently of any connection to Richard Morrison or his business interests. The applause was thunderous. I could see approval in the faces of many of the female reporters, could sense the shift in the room's energy. I was no longer just the victim of a cheating husband. I was the strong woman who'd fought back, who'd refused to be defeated, who'd turned her pain into purpose. Thank you all for your time, I said, stepping back from the microphone. I will not be taking questions today, but press packets with detailed information will be available shortly. I walked off the stage, leaving Richard sitting alone in his chair, surrounded by shouting reporters and flashing cameras. Through the chaos, I could hear him trying to answer questions, trying to explain himself, trying to salvage something from the disaster I'd created. But it was too late. The damage was done. By 3 p.m., the story was trending on social media. By 4 p.m., it was being covered by national news networks. By 5 p.m., Richard Morrison was the most notorious man in Chicago, and I was free. The weeks following the press conference were a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and personal transformation. The story had gone viral nationally, with headlines like Chicago power couple's marriage implodes at charity event, and lawyer exposes husband's affair in spectacular public revenge. Richard's business collapsed within days. Morrison and Associates lost 3 major clients within 48 hours of the press conference. The embezzlement investigation led to criminal charges, and the Illinois State Bar Association launched an inquiry into his professional conduct. The man who'd once commanded respect at every business gathering in Chicago was now a pariah, his name synonymous with betrayal and disgrace. Amanda Chen was fired immediately after the press conference, her brief tenure as Richard's special projects coordinator ending in scandal. She'd tried to sell her story to several tabloids, but the narrative had already been set. She was the other woman, the homewrecker, the secretary who'd helped destroy a marriage. Meanwhile, I found myself in an unexpected position. The legal community was divided between those who admired my strategic brilliance and those who thought I'd gone too far. But public opinion was overwhelmingly on my side. I'd become a symbol of female empowerment, the woman who'd refused to be a victim, who'd taken control of her own story. The Emily Morrison Foundation for Women's Justice was flooded with donations and support. Within a month, we'd raised over $2 million and had begun providing legal aid and counseling services to women dealing with infidelity, financial abuse, and other forms of betrayal. But something was bothering me. Something about the whole situation felt too neat, too perfectly orchestrated. I'd been so focused on my revenge that I'd barely questioned how easily things had fallen into place. That's when I got the call from Sarah, my journalist friend. "Emily, we need to talk," she said, her voice tense. "Can you meet me tonight? Somewhere private?" We met at a small wine bar in Lincoln Park, far from the downtown area where we might be recognized. Sarah looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if she expected to be watched. "I've been doing some digging," she said after we'd ordered our drinks. "About Richard, about Amanda, about the whole situation. And I've found something that's going to change everything you think you know about what happened." "What are you talking about?" Sarah pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Amanda Chen didn't seduce your husband, Emily. She was hired to seduce him." I stared at her, not understanding. Hired by whom? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But I've traced several payments made to Amanda over the past year, payments that came from an offshore account that has no connection to Richard or his business. Someone paid her $50,000 to get close to Richard, to make him fall for her, to destroy your marriage. My blood turned to ice. That's impossible. Why would someone... Emily, think about it. Amanda Chen graduated from Northwestern with a degree in international finance. She spoke 4 languages and had job offers from 3 major investment firms. Why would someone with her qualifications take a secretary job at a mid-sized consulting firm? I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were bank statements, financial records, and a series of photographs that made my stomach turn. Pictures of Amanda meeting with various people, exchanging envelopes, sitting in expensive restaurants with men I didn't recognize. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I've been tracking her movements for the past 2 weeks. She didn't disappear after the press conference like everyone thinks. She's been staying at the Four Seasons, living quite comfortably for someone who just lost her job. But who would want to destroy my marriage, and why?" Sarah's expression was grim. "That's what we need to figure out." "But Emily, I think you need to consider the possibility that everything that happened, the affair, the press conference, even your revenge, was orchestrated by someone else." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "You're saying someone manipulated me into destroying my own marriage?" "I'm saying someone wanted your marriage destroyed, and they used both you and Richard to accomplish it. The question is, who benefits from the Morrison empire crumbling?" Over the next several days, I couldn't focus on anything else. I kept thinking about Sarah's words, about the possibility that I'd been manipulated into ruining my own life. The more I thought about it, the more questions arose. How had David Kim been able to gather evidence so quickly and easily? How had Marcus managed to arrange such comprehensive media coverage for what should have been a routine charity announcement? How had everything fallen into place so perfectly for my revenge? I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started by revisiting my relationship with David Kim, the private investigator who'd provided the evidence that destroyed Richard. David's office was in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place that screamed discretion and no questions asked. When I arrived unannounced, his secretary seemed surprised to see me. "Miss Morrison, how wonderful to see you again. David spoke so highly of the work you two did together." "Is he available? I have some follow-up questions about the case." "Oh, I'm sorry, but David is out of the country on an extended assignment. He left right after your press conference, actually. Said he had a client in Switzerland who needed his services." "Switzerland? How convenient. When will he be back?" He wasn't sure. "Could be months," he said, "but he left detailed files on all his cases if you need anything specific." I asked to see the files on my case, but was told they'd been transferred to secure storage and would take several days to retrieve. Another convenient delay. As I left David's office, I noticed something I'd missed during my previous visits. The building directory listed several other businesses on David's floor, including a company called Meridian Strategic Consulting. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. When I got home, I did some research. Meridian Strategic Consulting was a boutique firm specializing in reputation management and strategic communications. Their client list was confidential, but their website boasted about helping high-profile individuals navigate complex personal and professional challenges. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still couldn't see the full picture. That evening, I got an unexpected visitor. Marcus showed up at my door, looking haggard and nervous. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my apartment. "There are things about the press conference, about everything that happened that you need to know." "What things?" He paced my living room like a caged animal. "I've been getting calls, Emily. Threatening calls. Someone doesn't want me talking about who really arranged the press conference." "What do you mean? Who really arranged it?" "I arranged it. I called you." "You called me, yes. But the funding, the media contacts, the logistics, all of that was handled by someone else. Someone who had connections I don't have, resources I don't have access to." I sat down heavily on my couch. "Marcus, you're not making sense." "The day after you called me, I got a call from someone claiming to represent an interested party who wanted to ensure your press conference was a success. They offered to cover all the expenses and help coordinate the media coverage." "Who was it?" "I don't know. The calls came from different numbers, all untraceable. But the money was real, Emily. Someone paid $75,000 to make sure your press conference was the biggest media event of the year." I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I thought you knew. I thought you'd arranged it yourself, that you were just being discreet about your financial backers. It wasn't until I started getting these threatening calls that I realized something was wrong." Marcus sat down across from me, his hands shaking. "Emily, I think we were both used. Someone wanted Richard Morrison destroyed, and they used us to do it." "But who? And why?" "I don't know, but I think you need to be very careful. If someone was willing to go to these lengths to destroy Richard, what do you think they'll do to keep their involvement secret?" After Marcus left, I sat in my apartment, trying to process everything I'd learned. Someone had orchestrated the entire situation. The affair, the investigation, the press conference, everything. But who had the resources and motivation to destroy Richard's life so completely? Then I remembered something. A conversation from months ago, before any of this started, before I'd even suspected Richard was cheating. I'd been at a legal conference in New York, and I'd run into Jonathan Blackwood, a former colleague who now worked for one of the largest law firms in the country. We'd had drinks, caught up on old times, and he'd mentioned something that hadn't seemed important at the time. "Your husband's company has been doing quite well," he'd said. "In fact, I heard some interesting rumor about a potential merger with Blackstone Industries." Blackstone Industries, one of the largest consulting firms in the world, with offices in every major city and clients that included Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. I'd asked Richard about it later, but he'd dismissed it as industry gossip. "There's always merger talk in our business," he'd said. "Most of it's just wishful thinking." But what if it wasn't just gossip? What if someone at Blackstone had wanted to acquire Morrison & Associates, and Richard had refused to sell? I spent the next several hours researching Blackstone Industries online. Their corporate structure was complex, with dozens of subsidiaries and shell companies. But as I dug deeper, I found connections that made my blood run cold. Meridian Strategic Consulting, the company in David Kim's building, was a subsidiary of Blackstone Industries. The offshore account that had paid Amanda Chen traced back to another Blackstone subsidiary. Even the Four Seasons Hotel, where Amanda was staying, was owned by a company that was ultimately controlled by Blackstone. Jonathan Blackwood, my former colleague, wasn't just any lawyer at Blackstone. He was the head of their mergers and acquisitions division, the man responsible for identifying and acquiring target companies. I'd been played. Completely, thoroughly, expertly played. Someone at Blackstone had identified Richard's company as a valuable acquisition target. When Richard refused to sell, they devised a plan to destroy him personally and professionally, making his company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. They'd hired Amanda to seduce Richard, arranged for me to discover the affair, provided the evidence I needed for my revenge, and orchestrated the press conference that destroyed his reputation. And I'd been the perfect weapon, too angry and hurt to ask the right questions, too focused on my revenge to see the bigger picture. The most chilling part was how well they'd known me. They'd understood exactly how I would react to discovering Richard's affair, exactly how far I would go to get my revenge. They'd counted on my legal training, my strategic thinking, my need for justice. They'd turned me into the architect of my own husband's destruction. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my manipulation, I felt a cold rage building inside me. These people had stolen my life, my marriage, my future. They'd turned me into a weapon and then discarded me, leaving me to live with the consequences of their scheme. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd chosen to manipulate a lawyer, someone who understood how to build a case, how to gather evidence, how to pursue justice. And I was very, very good at my job. The next morning, I began planning my real revenge. Not against Richard, who'd been as much a victim as I was, but against the people who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare. I started by reaching out to Richard. He was living in a small apartment downtown, his business gone, his reputation destroyed, facing criminal charges for embezzlement he'd actually committed, but never would have without Amanda's encouragement. When he saw me at his door, his face went through a series of emotions. Surprise, anger, hope, despair. "Emily," he said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you." "We need to talk, Richard, about what really happened to us." I told him everything I discovered about Amanda, about Blackstone, about the manipulation we'd both endured. I watched his face as he processed the information, saw the moment when he realized that his affair hadn't been a moment of weakness, but a carefully orchestrated trap. "My God," he whispered, "they destroyed us. They destroyed everything we built." "Yes," I said, "but they're not done paying for it." Over the next several weeks, Richard and I worked together to build a case against Blackstone Industries. We gathered evidence of their manipulation, documented their financial connections to Amanda and the other players in their scheme, and prepared for the legal battle of our lives. It wasn't easy. We were still dealing with the emotional fallout from our destroyed marriage, still working through the pain and betrayal we'd both experienced. But we were united by a common enemy and a shared desire for justice. The lawsuit we filed against Blackstone Industries was comprehensive and devastating. We sued for conspiracy, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with contractual relations. We demanded damages not just for the financial losses Richard had suffered, but for the emotional trauma we'd both endured. The legal battle lasted 18 months. Blackstone fought us with everything they had, using their vast resources to try to discredit our evidence and destroy our credibility. But we were prepared for their tactics, and we had something they didn't expect: the truth. The case went to trial on a cold February morning. The courthouse was packed with reporters, legal observers, and corporate executives who understood the implications of what we were alleging. If we won, it would send a message to every major corporation that this kind of manipulation would not be tolerated. During my closing argument, I looked directly at the Blackstone legal team and said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you have heard over the past 3 weeks is the story of corporate psychopathy. These people identified 2 successful, happy individuals and decided to destroy their lives for profit. They turned a marriage into a weapon, love into leverage, and trust into a tool for destruction." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict that would change everything. "We find in favor of the plaintiffs," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "We award damages in the amount of $50 million, plus punitive damages of $100 million. The courtroom erupted. Blackstone's stock price plummeted within hours of the verdict. Jonathan Blackwood was fired the next day. The scandal rocked the corporate world and led to new regulations governing merger and acquisition practices. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that we'd exposed the truth, that we'd held powerful people accountable for their actions, that we'd proven that even the most sophisticated schemes could be unraveled by 2 people who refused to be victims. Richard and I never remarried. Too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. But we found a way to work together, to support each other, to build something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. The Emily Morrison Foundation for Women's Justice expanded to include support for anyone who'd been manipulated or exploited by powerful interests. We helped other couples who'd been targeted by corporate schemes, provided legal aid to individuals fighting against institutional manipulation, and worked to prevent others from experiencing what we'd endured. And sometimes, late at night, I would think about the chain of events that had led us here. How a simple desire for revenge had uncovered a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of corporate power. How being manipulated had ultimately given us the tools to fight back against our manipulators. The truth, as I'd learned, was more complex than any story of simple betrayal. We'd all been pawns in someone else's game. Richard, Amanda, me, even the investigators and publicists who'd helped orchestrate our destruction. But in the end, we'd found a way to turn the game back on its creators. We'd taken their weapons and used them for justice. We'd transformed their manipulation into our triumph. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying revenge of all. As I stood at my office window looking out at the Chicago skyline, I smiled. Somewhere in this city, corporate executives were learning that ordinary people could fight back, that victims could become victors, that the truth would always find a way to surface. The game was far from over. But for the first time in years, I was playing by my own rules.